Alright, hello, this is Dimitri, and this is the first weblog that I've made in a while, so hopefully you'll be able to hear this, and hopefully this will all be intelligible. One of the reasons I've decided to start video journaling again is because the only people who seem to really read my written blog tend to be the kind of people that I'm writing about because they want to keep track and keep tabs on what I'm writing. And I guess that it gives them some sort of satisfaction with feeling themselves to be the center of my world, whereas they're really not. It's like, so many people who are like what we would call emotional black holes want to feel like they're the dark center of someone's universe, but really usually they just pass right through and they only see that fraction of your life that pertains directly to them. But this video is an attempt to kind of branch out and reach out to more people who I feel are a little more like-minded. I've been in similar situations to myself. And the main aim for this video is to kind of bail people out of being accused of false martyrdom if they belong to a group of very empathic individuals. Because oftentimes, when we're dealing with any one of a pair of extremes, and if we are ourselves closer to the median, the average, the top of the proverbial bell curve, we'll tend to confuse people who are in one extreme with another. So, for instance, let's say that you're very politically moderate, you're from a fairly, kind of down-to-earth, but more or less apolitical family. You might misattribute things like really right-wing ideologies to communism or something like that, or, vice versa. And in much the same way as we do that in politics, and we do that in things like music, people who confuse different deviant trends, and like diehard fans will tell you, no, we're definitely not those other guys. People do that in general with, human personalities. And this is especially true for the human personalities of narcissist and empath, because they're basically two opposite ends of the same pole. One is extremely receptive to other people's emotions to an extent that just blows people's minds and is overwhelming to that person and to those around that person. And the other is just totally ambivalent to those emotions and kind of uses or manipulates them. So one of the problems is that, as I've stated, most people are somewhere in between. And arguably, over the course of human time, we are getting more and more to the state where more of us are empathic, and that requires fewer people who are part of the empathic minority to be turned into martyrs and scapegoats. Because a lot of times, people like this, and I count myself in this group, put ourselves in situations for other people, and we drain ourselves, and we ourselves become very hard to be around because our behavior becomes unpredictable to someone who's not working on that particular project of healing. And so to the conventional person, we pass for like a sociopath, someone who doesn't conform to the conventions that make most people feel safe, but does so not with the intent of actually helping people and helping humanity in general, as well as specific individuals, but is mainly just trying to benefit his or herself at others' expense, and doing so in a way that looks as though that person's trying to help others. So the first thing that you have to realize is that if you're an empath, then you know. And yet you probably tend to be a little self-effacing. You might be so absorbed in what's going on around you, you might not really know that you know. It's like we have this intuitive notion about who we are and the role that we play in life, and yet we're told that, we have to be like everyone else. And sometimes this is thinly disguised as like saying, well, we're equal to everyone else, so don't talk down to people, or don't be in a high horse situation. But really, if you are part of a minority of people who excel at something, you shouldn't be ashamed to admit it. But a lot of times, empaths are the ones who are ashamed to admit it because they're often misunderstood. Whenever you have a lot of information coming in, and it's emotionally charged, because that is the nature of the information that the empath gets, you get passionate, and you can go to an extreme. And there's something about morality that being average doesn't cut it. Let's just put it that way. There was a psychologist named Lawrence Kohlberg who theorized that there were 6 or maybe even 7 stages of moral development. And most people apparently only get up to the 3rd stage. That is the adolescent stage where you fill a role. And in this stage, it's part of conventional morality, which means society dictates to you what morality is, and you know where you stand based on what the people around you tell you. And the 2nd stage of conventional morality, which is the 4th stage of moral development, is the law, basically, and social institutions. But the funny thing is that it's only a minority of people who actually understand how to get past conventional morality. And the first of those stages is where everything seems totally relative and ambiguous, and we don't really know who's who. And the last stage is the universal stage, where you see the universal value of all human beings, and you try to accord yourself with that. And arguably, there's a 7th stage of moral development, which would be post-conventional as well, or maybe post-conventional, which is allying yourself with God, or some sort of religious principle. So here you have this notion that the law and the society are somewhere in between, and most people occur there. And most of those people actually value the society more than they value the law, even though the law is technically a little bit more developed. And mainly, those people aren't considered living below the law because they're the people that mainly vote law into law in a democratic society, or in a mob-ruled society, or a tribe that has voting. Mainly the people who are considered below the law are pre-conventional people who are only out for their own gains, and sometimes, and the first of those stages is just, avoiding punishment and maximizing personal benefit. The second of those is quid pro quo, which has some sexual connotations because of how it's used in corporate culture, but mainly it just means I do this for you, you do that for me. And this is confused with reciprocal altruism, which is post-conventional, which is the notion that, well, it's in the interest of humanity that we do this for each other. And the distinction is that whereas the person who's doing quid pro quo is clearly trying to just serve himself and might rip you off, the reciprocal altruist will always put you first. He just wants to be put first as well, because that's the only way that the example catches on. That's the only way that he knows that not only is he getting a return, which isn't the point, but that other people are following his example and he's making the world a better place. So a lot of times people will confuse living above the law with living below the law. And a lot of times, a lot of the problem with that is because you got people living on the law who are governing all these people who are living, just kind of right below it. And they're trying to protect people who are just filling a social role. And their common sense becomes that of the group. And they say there is no above the law. You're either one of us or you're an asshole, which is, of course, taken to an extreme. You get very radical, terrible situations like fascism. So, where do empaths and narcissists come into this? Well, narcissists tend to be less morally developed because they don't really have the moral and the emotional incentive to really care about people. And a lot of them do get up to the stage where they're really good at filling a role because that's how they get around. That's how they feed their egos, so to speak, because the society is always telling them that, oh, you're so good at being this sort of person, and don't be that other sort of person, right? But the empath will usually realize that all that's kind of stupid, because every in-group has an out-group, and if you love all people on some level, on some profound level, then it's ridiculous to just prefer that your group is better because you're part of it. Also, groups tend to do something called scapegoating, which means that if someone doesn't belong to the group, but that person's always around, that person will kind of receive all of the projections of everything that those other people want to do but won't do because they don't think it's right. And really, in most cases, what people consider to be right depends on what keeps them integrated into the society, because society is right. So here you immediately see some ways that narcissists and empaths have things in common from the perspective of the average person, or people in that general spectrum of, having medium empathy. For one thing, both narcissists and empaths will tend to project a lot. In other words, they'll be eccentric, but they'll be drawn to one another, actually, because neither of them really fits in. And here's the weird thing. They think it's easy to see how it seems like everyone else is a hypocrite, because from the perspective of either the narcissist or the empath, everyone is really more like oneself than they think. In other words, a narcissist will tend to see other people as being like himself, like the narcissist himself, and empaths will tend to see other people as being empathic, and they will tend to expect that, and sometimes they can be aggressive in trying to do that and communicating that. So one of the reasons why a lot of empaths get labeled as narcissists, and one of the things that you shouldn't let people get away with if you are an empath, is because we see other people as an extension of ourselves. The thing about narcissism is it starts with the self and never goes actually through other people. Other people are just kind of abstract from what I studied and observed and kind of intuited and corroborated through research, and they're only really aimed at serving the ego. And the thing that the narcissist says, well, that's what everyone's doing. Because obviously, if everyone else is merely a means to an end for you, you kind of see them as an extension of you, right? So everyone else seems like that person's a selfish bastard, and it seems like life is just this meaningless conflict between us, and the aim is to win, right? And you get a lot of people like that in corporate culture, and really, you get them everywhere. And you've known a few people like this. I can guarantee you that, unless you have like extremely good, like mythically good karma, and you decide to opt out of ever having to deal with them. Just consciously or unconsciously, just said no, thank you. I'm just gonna chill this lifetime, which is unlikely if you're a very good karma kind of person. You'll probably want to come back and help deal with those people. And I'm still learning how to do it. The thing about the empath is that it starts with others. In other words, the empath has a gift for reading other people and can use that to his or her advantage and kind of fit in, but usually we'll realize that's just not what we're here for. We want to heal other people. We want to help the scapegoat. We want to help the person who's been left out. We want to help the victim. And in the process, we're willing to risk becoming the victims ourselves. But we also risk, and what we don't often realize it, is that a lot of the victims that we're trying to help are actually manipulating us into doing that. And when we ourselves become victims, actual victims of these false victims, we bear the blame, because the average person doesn't really believe in this contemporary culture that there is such a thing as a real victim. Because obviously, if you're of average empathy, you're really still very self-centered. You're not narcissistic. You care about other people, but you care about them only to the extent that you can like sympathize with them, and you'll help them try to realize their ego. And it's not like you wake up every morning and you feel the burden of all the pain in the world. You might feel your own pain. You might feel the pain even of people who are close to you, because you don't want them to suffer. And they represent a part of you. And you'll try to minimize that, but sometimes you'll even go to the extreme of hurting other people, like people in the outgroup, in the opposing tribe, or gang, or political party, or nation, or whatever. And this is something that an empath will never do. So an empath won't fit in. But the empath will so value human beings as ends in and of themselves that it'll be impossible not to at least one point get the idea that all other human beings feel this way. Because if every human being has value, then by extension, and every human being is essentially good and worthwhile, then by extension, all these other good people, and if I'm good, all these other good people must be kind of like me. And if I lead by example, they'll follow that example, not because they're necessarily trying to follow me, but because that's what human beings do. But oftentimes this is too steep an order for people to fill, and the problem is that the empath gets shunned. And here's the key thing you have to remember. It's not uncommon in this day and age for people to presume that if everyone seems to be out to get you, that it's your fault. It's not necessarily your fault. The thing is, you may be attracting people with serious problems to your life who take you for granted. And they might not be all narcissistic. They might just be going through a tough time. And you'll take that burden onto yourself, and you'll drain yourself. And you'll put up with a lot of bullshit. And when you naturally need to refill and assert yourself in your own needs, they might wonder why you can't just do it for yourself, because in their opinion, they are self-sufficient. Whereas really, no one's self-sufficient. No one really has full control over his or her own life because we're all interdependent. And an empath is one of those people that these people depend upon, but they might not know it. They might take it for granted. They might suppose, well, that's what you owe them for whatever reason. And you might feel that way, but you really feel like you owe it to them just because they need it. And by extension, you feel like people owe things to you because you need it, but they might not feel the same way. And so, if you're an empath, you're likely to fall into the situation of a martyr and a scapegoat. And once people start treating you like the outsider, and this could even happen in your own family. I mean, it's happened to me. You might lash out, and you might start holding them to the standards that you've come to accept as normal, which were really abusive habits from the people that you were trying to take care of. Maybe other people, maybe like the people you go to for help are not the people who are the most abusive to you, but you might start becoming abusive towards those people you go to for help because you don't know what healthy boundaries are, because for you it's all about the love and not really about the self and protecting yourself. The key thing I need you to remember, and do try to drill this into your head, but really you probably won't need to if it's that important, it'll probably just stick with you, is when